Alright, Band of Brothers. The name for this game comes from the famous St. Crispin's Day speech in Shakespeare's play Henry V. It was delivered by the king before the Battle of Agincourt. Here is part of it. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother, be he ne'er so vile. This day shall gentle his condition. And gentlemen in England now abed shall think themselves accursed that they were not here, and hold their manhoods cheap whiles any speaks that fought with us upon St. Crispin's Day. The meaning conveyed by these words is that there is a special bond between those that fight together. Others have said that although a soldier may be aware that he is fighting for his country or freedom, he fights most of all for his buddies in his unit, his brothers. The term Band of Brothers has famously been used by others to refer to the 101st Airborne. Why apply it to the whole series? Has been famously used by others to refer specifically to the 101st Airborne. Why apply it to the whole series? Just as the lines were originally penned for a situation involving the 100 Years' War, just as they can be applied to the 101st Airborne, I believe that they can be applied to units of all nationalities. It really seems to be the defining attitude or element of tactical combat. For detailed designer notes and examples of play, please refer to the Battle Manual. It highlights some of the key design decisions, especially as they contrast with other tactical games. This comprehensive rulebook covers all games in the series, though not all rules are used in every game. This first part of the rules will introduce you to all the rules that you need to know to play the first training scenario. Important changes are in blue. Rules that are for the Pacific but are optional or not needed in Europe are in green. Abbreviations: Area of Control, AOC, Command Point, CP, Fog of War, FOW, Firepower, FP, Landing Craft is LC, Line of Sight is LOS, Morale Check is MC, Movement Point is MP, Opportunity Fire is OpFire, Player Aid Card is PAC, Proficiency or Proficient is Prof, Satchel Charge is SC, Special Anti-Tank Weapon is SATW, Scenario Special Rule is SSR, Unconfirmed Kill is UK, Weapons Team is WT. Okay. Game turns. The game is played in a series of turns, each representing about 2 minutes of time. Each game turn contains the following 4 phases. Operations phase. Players alternate moving and firing units. Route phase. Certain units must check to see if they route. Melee phase. Units in the same hex have melee combat. Recovery phase. Units recover from suppression and game counters are removed or advanced. Okay. Components. Map. The maps can be combined in different ways as required by the scenario. Each hex is about 40 yards. Half hexes are fully playable. Die. The main die in this game is 10-sided, D10, and is used for all die rolls except for artillery drift. A 0 equals a 10 on this die, so a roll will yield a result between 1 and 10. Game counters. Counters depict units such as infantry squads and weapons teams, individual guns and vehicles, and assets such as aircraft, artillery, and illumination. Infantry units have 2 sides. The front is the full strength side, and the back is the reduced strength side of the unit. There are 2 types of infantry units. Squads. Most of the infantry counters represent infantry squads of 9 to 15 men. They have 5 movement points. Okay, so these ones are squads. Weapon teams, WTS. These are a small group of individuals that are trained to operate one or more heavy weapons. They are marked with a WT. They are treated just like squads, except because of the heavy nature of their equipment, they only have 4 movement points instead of 5. In melee, a full-strength weapons team has 2 firepower, and a reduced weapons team has 1 firepower. In melee, a weapons team is eliminated if it suffers casualties. Weapons teams may not perform assault fire except for machine gun weapons teams mounted in a non-LC landing craft carrier. Okay. Assault fire. Don't know what that is yet. Reduced units. Full-strength squads or weapons teams that become reduced are flipped to their reduced side with a horizontal stripe. Reduced squads or weapons teams that are reduced, again, are eliminated. Okay. Stacking. There are some hexes in advanced scenarios that have 2 locations: caves, bridges, multi-level buildings. All other hexes have just 1 location. Only 2 squads or weapons teams per side may be in a location at the end of a unit's move. Company identifier. Okay, I thought that was the reduced symbol, but no. Morale on the right. Firepower, proficient firepower, melee firepower, range, casualty. Infantry unit attributes. Firepower. This represents the unit's ability to inflict damage on other units. This consists of 2 numbers. Let me zoom out. So these numbers here. The first number is the normal firepower on the left and is used in most situations. The second number is the proficient firepower and is used for op fire, opportunity fire, final opportunity fire, and assault fire. Some units also have a smaller number next to their firepower, which is their melee firepower, and that's this number here. Okay. Range, here on the middle. This is the number of hexes over which a unit can use its full firepower. Casualty. This consists of 2 numbers for a full-strength unit, here on the right, and 1 number for a reduced unit. It represents an aspect of a unit's training and cohesion. Units with high casualty ratings are less likely to take casualties. Okay. Special anti-tank weapon number. This is only on squads with a special anti-tank weapon. A lower number represents a better chance to have and use a special anti-tank weapon. Company identifier. Not all counters have this. Used only when a scenario uses company CPs. What's a CP? Command post? Command point. Or by SSR, special scenario special rule. Infantry facing. This is an optional rule in Band of Brothers scenarios set in Europe, but it is required for those set in the Pacific. If not using this facing rule, all references to infantry facing can be ignored. The placement of a unit within a hex is very important and indicates its facing. The top of the unit is placed to line up with a hex spine corner. In the example, what example? Oh, here. In the example, all hexes in front of the black line are part of the unit's front. All hexes behind the black line are part of the unit's flank. Units within the same hex may have different facings. An infantry unit cannot change its facing if it fails its morale check or special anti-tank weapon check when selected to be moved or fired. Facing has no impact on spotting for artillery. Okay. So these guys are facing up and to the left. Infantry units without a facing. A unit that is moving, routing, in a carrier, or concealed does not have a facing when attacked. Moving, routing, in a carrier, or concealed does not have a facing when attacked. All fire against it is considered towards its front. A concealed infantry unit chooses its facing when it loses its concealment. A moving or routing unit may adopt any facing at the end of its move, including when it is forced to back up after a close assault, after failing a morale check during a move in a fully stacked hex, etc. Okay. Command points, CPs. Each side receives a number of command points per turn in each scenario. They abstractly represent the overall leadership abilities of each army in that battle. Each player takes the appropriate number of command point counters. A command point may be used for one of the following functions. 1. Re-roll any infantry morale check die roll made by that player. 2. The player moving second may perform one action with one unit or asset before the other player at the start of a turn. The only limit on the number of units that can be used this way is the number of command points the player has. Okay. 3. For an infantry unit to conduct final opportunity fire on a unit that is further than 1 hex away, but not more than normal range, the unit would still have to pass a morale check after the command point was used. 4. Re-roll a melee, not close assault, combat roll made by that player. Only one command point per side may be spent this way in each melee each turn. 5. Increase infantry proficient firepower by 1, but not greater than the normal firepower before one attack. 6. Increase an unmounted infantry unit's movement points by 1 for that phase only. Expending a command point does not guarantee success in all situations. A unit that used a command point to re-roll a morale check may again fail the morale check. In this case, the command point would have been expended with no benefit. Once a side's command points have been expended, it may no longer conduct any of the above functions that turn. Only one command point can be used on a unit each turn. As each command point is used, one of that player's command point counters is placed on the unit or asset to show which units have used command points and to track how many command points a player has used. These counters are returned to each player during the recovery phase. Command points may not be accumulated for use in future turns. Company command points. Some scenarios may assign command points to specific companies. A unit may only use a command point from its own company. Units and artillery not assigned to a company can use any command point. Operations phase. This phase is the heart of the turn and is where units move and fire. The player listed as going first on the scenario card starts the operation phase. Exception: command points function number 2. Oh, that's where you could go first with one unit. So the player that starts must perform a certain number of operations within the limits of his operations range. Each infantry unit selected to move, fire, marked as opportunity fire, or simply marked as used counts as one operation. Or simply marked as used. Okay, other types of operations are defined later in the rules. A player's counters consist of units, infantry, guns, vehicles, and assets, aircraft, artillery, illumination. An asset is not a unit, but counts as a certain number of units when used during the player's operations range. A player must use all of his units in each turn, but may choose whether or not to use an asset. When all units have been used, the player can continue to use assets within his operations range until he passes. Operations range. This abstractly represents the command and control capabilities of an army, as well as its flexibility and leadership. It is a number range given on the scenario card. Okay. Example. A side that had an operations range of 3 to 6 in a scenario would have to select between a minimum of 3 units and a maximum of 6 units. Then the other side would be allowed to select units in its operations range. Okay. A player chooses one unit or asset at a time and uses it. The player does not have to pre-select all the units or assets that he will be using. Units, including decoys and assets, count against the operations range when they are each used. A unit that fails a morale check is marked with a used counter and counts against the operations range. Players alternate using their units within the limits of their operations range until all units have been used on both sides. Once one side has used all of its units, the other side may continue to use the rest of its units. The operations phase of a turn does not end until both sides have used or marked as op-fire all of their units. I see. So this is kind of, yeah. So in Rebel Fury, for example, you alternate one unit at a time. I do one unit, you do one unit, and you keep going back and forth like that. So in this game, it's not one unit at a time. You get a range of units. So it's interesting to see how these different games handle that, the simultaneity of the action. Okay. Vehicles, guns, and artillery count as 3 units used against the operations range. A unit or decoy that starts and ends its use concealed a unit or decoy that starts and ends its use concealed always counts as 1 unit against the operations range, even if it is a gun or vehicle. Okay. A player may never use more than the maximum amount of units. And must use at least the minimum amount unless it is impossible to select another unit without exceeding the maximum. In that case, play passes to his opponent. Example. A player uses an infantry unit and then an artillery asset, which counts as 3 units, for a total of 4 units. He cannot now use a vehicle during this operations range because it counts as a further 3 units, which would exceed his operations range limit of 6. Got it. Used. As each unit moves, fires, or fails a morale check, it is marked with a used counter. Example. If 2 units in the same hex both attempt to move, and one passes the morale check and moves, while the other does not and remains in place, they are both marked as used. In addition, any unit may be marked as used, even in melee or if a decoy, without taking an action. Units that are marked used can take no further actions during the operations phase except final opportunity fire, spot for artillery, and fire illumination. Marking units for opportunity fire, op-fire. Instead of moving or firing a unit, a player may decide to mark it with an op-fire counter, enabling the unit to fire later in that operations phase at a moving enemy unit. Artillery may also be marked with an op-fire counter. Marking a unit for op-fire counts against that side's operations range. Such a unit cannot move, but may change its facing, as it is being marked for op-fire. Exception: a gun in a building may not change its facing. A unit that is marked as op-fire has its op-fire counter flipped to its used side when it op-fires at an enemy unit. Note that it is possible for a unit that is marked as op-fire to end the turn without having fired. Decoys may be marked as op-fire. Movement. Each unit has a set movement point allowance. Squads are 5 movement points. Weapons teams are 4 movement points. When using units as part of the operations phase, units may be moved up to the limit of their movement points. Movement is from hex to adjacent connected hex. Movement points may not be saved for another turn or transferred to other units. The various terrain types each have a movement point cost that is deducted from a unit's movement point allowance as that unit moves. See the player aid card for movement costs. A unit cannot enter a hex unless it has movement points to do so. Example: an infantry squad that has traversed 4 open hexes, which cost 1 movement point each, has only 1 movement point remaining, so it could not enter an adjacent building, which costs 2 movement points, without spending a command point to get an extra movement point. Units that move or attempt to move are marked as used. An infantry unit must pass a morale check before moving, even if the unit is entering from off-board. If the unit's current morale is 10, normal for units that are not suppressed or reduced, it is automatically successful and no roll is needed. Moving units may be paused to receive opportunity fire. A moving infantry unit that receives opportunity fire that results in suppression must pass an immediate morale check, even if it passed one at the start of its move, or its move ends and it is marked as used. If a unit fails its morale check during its move, and this causes a hex to be overstacked, then the unit is instead retreated back to its previous hex, regardless of movement points remaining. A unit may move into a hex containing an enemy squad or weapons team or gun if it has enough movement points to enter the terrain of that hex. Upon entering, it must stop. If the unit receives a suppression result from multiple sources, it must take a morale check each time. A unit that starts adjacent to an enemy unit, tries to enter that unit's hex, and takes suppression, may choose to remain in its current hex. Exception: Banzai and Seishin. Withdrawal. Non-Japanese infantry units that are in an enemy-occupied hex, when selected, may attempt to move out of it if otherwise able, but the morale is reduced by 3 for that check. If successful, they may move normally, but may not move into a hex with another enemy unit in that move. If no other friendly units are left in the hex being withdrawn from, enemy units in that hex can opportunity fire, or final opportunity fire at the withdrawing unit as it enters an adjacent hex. Japanese units in an enemy-occupied hex must be marked as used or opportunity fire when selected. I see. So I think the effect of this is that they go straight to melee. So during like the move and shoot phase, the Japanese units, once they get into the enemy hex, they can't move out, they can't do anything. They have to wait until the melee phase. Assault fire. A moving squad or some units in a carrier can assault fire with their proficient firepower after entering a hex. The unit is then marked used, and its move is over after the attack is resolved. Unless the unit is suppressed as it entered the hex, it does not need to pass a morale check to assault fire, as it already passed one to move. A moving squad has no facing, so there is no effect on its firepower for changing its facing to fire. The player may spend a command point to raise the proficient firepower by 1, but not greater than the normal firepower. Declared retreat. If, before moving an infantry unit, the player declares that the unit is retreating, the unit gets a +4 to its morale. This makes it easier to pass the morale check, but the unit then must follow all the movement restriction of a routing unit. Units starting in the same hex as an enemy unit cannot get this +4 morale modifier. Units using a declared retreat may not assault fire. Units using a declared retreat may not assault fire. Got it. Yeah, I really wish I need to have maybe the player aid chart has this, but I need all of this in sequence order. All of these options, I need to have them laid out in front of me in a sequence order so I don't forget anything. Follow me. A player may spend an available command point on an unmounted infantry unit to increase its movement points by 1 for that phase only. Infantry fire. A unit must pass a morale check to fire. Exception: assault fire. The act of firing occurs when a unit uses its firepower to attempt to inflict suppression or casualties on an enemy unit. Units may fire instead of move, assault fire after movement, or opportunity fire or final opportunity fire at moving enemy units. Facing. A unit may only fire at targets in hexes to its front. A unit that fails a morale check when it is selected does not get to change facing. Changing facing is not considered movement and would not trigger opportunity fire and final opportunity fire. A unit may change its facing as it fires, but doing so reduces its infantry firepower or proficient firepower by 1. Weapons teams and all Japanese squads cannot change facing to final opportunity fire. Okay. Range. A unit firing at a target within its normal range, as defined by its range number, does so at full firepower. Infantry may fire at a target at up to twice its normal range. Exception: mortars, special anti-tank weapons, and GD squads. What is that? But its firepower is halved, rounded down. This halving occurs before applying modifiers for terrain and situations. Fire restrictions and effects. If the unit fails the morale check, it is marked as used without firing. Units may not fire if in the same location as an enemy unit. Units may not fire into a location containing unmounted friendly infantry or guns, but may fire through a hex containing units from either side. Each unit must execute its fire attack individually. No units may combine fire attacks. Okay, this one is key. A roll of a 10 on a fire attack is always no effect. Fire at a location always affects all infantry and guns there. Exception: attacks that specifically target vehicles. The firing unit must have line of sight to the target. Exception: mortar-directed fire. If the adjusted firepower is less than 1, the attack may still be made as long as it is within normal range. A roll of a 1 against a target in normal range always results in at least a suppression result. If adjacent, a roll of 1 results in the target being reduced at least once or eliminated if the target is a gun. Executing a fire attack. Direct fire. Direct fire includes all fire in this game except that by mortars, artillery, and aircraft. Beneficial terrain. If the terrain in a unit's hex lowers the firepower of direct fire, the unit is in beneficial terrain. Exception: orchards are also considered beneficial terrain. Adjust the unit's firepower by the modifiers on the player aid card. Beneficial terrain lowers the firepower, and being adjacent to the target will increase the firepower. Roll a die and compare it to the adjusted firepower. This one die roll is used individually against each unit in the hex. Apply this die roll for suppression and casualties against the units in the target hex as follows. If the roll is less than or equal to the adjusted firepower, the target is suppressed by 1 step. Place a yellow suppressed counter on each unit in the hex. If a unit is already marked with a yellow suppressed counter, flip it to the red fully suppressed side. If it is possible to add the first number, or only number if the target is reduced, of the target's casualty rating to the die roll, and the result is still less than or equal to the adjusted firepower, then the target is reduced and fully suppressed. Mark it with a red fully suppressed counter if it doesn't have one. This logic always seemed complicated to me, or confusing. If it is possible to add the second number of the target's casualty rating on a full strength unit to the die roll, and the result is still less than or equal to the adjusted firepower of the firing unit, then the target is eliminated and removed from the board. A unit already marked with a red fully suppressed counter does not suffer additional effects from another suppression result, and remains at its lowest morale value. If a unit is moving when it received a suppression result, it must pass an immediate morale check with its current morale, or have its move end and be marked as used. Units do not take morale checks from fire. They receive suppression, which lowers their effective morale. They can also take casualties. Okay. I think what this means is they don't automatically take morale checks from fire. Okay. Flank. When direct fire, not mortars, GD squads, SC, what's SC? Satchel charge, artillery, at a squad or weapons team comes from one of the hexes to the flank of the unit's front facing, the firepower of the firing unit is increased by 1. Suppression and morale checks. Suppression is a measure of the stress of combat and the effectiveness of fire received by infantry and guns. As a unit takes suppression from enemy fire, its morale decreases, reducing the possibility of that unit being able to perform operations within the game. An unsuppressed unit uses its highest white morale value. So if we look, I think, where was it? Here. This one. A unit marked with a yellow suppressed counter uses its middle yellow morale value, this one. A unit marked with a red fully suppressed counter uses its lowest red morale value, this one. Suppression wears off incrementally during the recovery phase. Morale check. Morale checks are taken when a unit attempts to do something. To resolve a morale check, roll a die. If it is less than or equal to the unit's current morale, it passes the morale check and may move or fire. Okay, so you roll a d10. If it's less than or equal to, it passes. And 0 is a 10. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is like a 60% chance that... So basically what this means is if they get suppressed and you try to get them to do something, there's a 60% chance they'll be able to do it. If they are fully suppressed and you try to get them to do something, there's a 20% chance that they'll be able to do it. If it is less than or equal to the unit's current morale, it passes the morale check and may move or fire. If the unit fails the morale check, it may not do these actions and is marked as used. It may not do these actions. So it is not allowed. It cannot do these actions and is marked as used. A unit with a morale of 10 means that a morale check is automatically successful and no roll is needed unless it is withdrawing from an enemy occupied hex. Okay. Casualties. When a full-strength squad or weapons team is reduced, the unit is flipped to its back, reduced side. A reduced unit that is reduced again is eliminated. Once a unit is reduced, it may not be flipped back to its full-strength side. When a unit becomes reduced, it is always marked with a red fully suppressed counter, even during rout and melee. Opportunity fire, OpFire. Opportunity fire is conducted by the non-moving player against enemy units as they are moving. The firing unit may not already be marked used. Whether it successfully fires or not, the unit is marked as used afterwards. Okay, if that unit was marked opportunity fire, the opportunity fire counter is flipped to its used side. Any number of units may attempt to opportunity fire at the same moving unit in the same hex. Opportunity fire is normally conducted at the hex the moving unit has just entered. The non-moving player may not back up a unit to a previous hex in order to fire at it. The moving player should give the non-moving player an opportunity to say he is firing. Exception. Opportunity fire may be conducted at a moving unit in the hex in which it began the turn if the first hex it enters places it in melee. It is subject to all the modifiers that it normally would be, including possibly moving in open ground. Opportunity fire that results in suppression requires the moving unit to pass an immediate morale check. Even if it passed one at the start of the move. Opportunity fire that results in suppression requires the unit, or its move immediately ends and it is marked as used. It does not get an opportunity to assault fire. I see. Units that were declared as retreating at the start of their move continue to get +4 to their morale. A unit that fails this morale check may still receive more opportunity fire in that hex, and any fire modifiers from moving still apply. I see. If a moving unit receives fire from multiple sources in a hex, it may end up taking several morale checks. If a unit gets backed up a hex for any reason, such as being overstacked due to the effect of opportunity fire or after a close assault, that unit cannot receive opportunity fire when being backed up. An infantry unit does not need to be marked with an opportunity fire counter to opportunity fire, although being marked opportunity fire can increase a unit's proficient firepower. The firing unit must pass a morale check to opfire. An infantry unit uses its proficient firepower when opfiring. The same die roll affects all units in the targeted hex, although different modifiers may apply to a moving unit as opposed to stationary units. For example, +4 firepower against moving unit in open ground and -2 firepower against another unit in the same hex in a foxhole. Okay. The proficient firepower is modified in each of the following cases. The modifiers are cumulative, but cannot increase the proficient firepower above the unit's normal firepower. +1 if the target unit is adjacent. +1 if the firing unit is marked as opfire. +1 if the player spends a command point on the attacking unit. -1 if the firing unit changed facing to fire. Once the proficient firepower is modified by the above modifiers, the other modifiers from the player aid card are applied. This includes the terrain of the target hex, moving in open ground, +3 for being adjacent to the target, etc. Note that these modifiers can increase the proficient firepower above that of the normal firepower. Okay, I see. Example. A German Panzer Grenadier squad, I think that's, okay, firepower 6/5, is marked as opportunity fire and is op-firing at a unit 3 hexes away, moving into a stone building. The proficient firepower of 5 is increased to 6 because of being marked as opfire. This player cannot spend a command point because that would increase the proficient firepower above the normal firepower. At this point, the terrain modifiers are applied, and the stone building reduces the firepower for the attack down to 4. Let's see. Final opfire. Final opportunity fire is similar to opportunity fire, except that it is conducted by units that have been marked as used. Unlike opportunity fire, final opportunity fire may only be conducted against units that move into an adjacent hex. Exception. A command point may be expended to allow a used infantry unit to attempt final opportunity fire at a target greater than 1 hex away, but within its normal range. All other requirements for final opportunity fire still apply. This command point does not guarantee that the unit will pass the necessary morale check. See also sustained fire optional rule. All modifiers for opportunity fire are applied to final opportunity fire in the same way as opportunity fire. There is also an additional -2 modifier to infantry firepower for this being final opportunity fire, making it less effective. A unit may attempt final opportunity fire every time an enemy unit moves to an adjacent hex. A unit that attempted opportunity fire, or final opportunity fire, may attempt final opportunity fire at the same unit during the same move, but only if the moving unit enters a different hex, or a different location within the hex. This may allow final opportunity fire at the same unit multiple times. Weapons teams and Japanese infantry. Weapons teams and Japanese squads can't change facing to final opportunity fire. Route phase. Infantry units that are in difficult situations on the battlefield may sometimes flee or surrender. This is represented by the route phase. The player that moves first in the scenario must complete his entire route phase first. Infantry units and guns that meet any of the following conditions at the start of their part of the route phase are subject to route. They are in the same hex and location as an enemy unit. They are adjacent to an enemy unit that is not in melee. They are not in beneficial terrain and are within 5 hexes of an enemy unit not in melee whose line of sight is not hindered. Exception. Japanese units marked with an S, Seishin, are only subject to route if in the same hex as an enemy unit at the start of their part of the route phase. Other Japanese units roll for route normally. Infantry units and guns subject to route must take a morale check. If a unit meets more than one of the above criteria, it still only takes one morale check. A unit that passes this morale check is unaffected. A unit cannot voluntarily fail this check so that it routes. An infantry unit routes using its normal movement allowance, although this is not considered normal movement and does not trigger opfire. It must move at least one hex and cannot move adjacent to an enemy unit which is not in melee, nor move closer in hexes to an enemy unit in its line of sight or that was in its line of sight at some previous point during route. If it cannot meet those criteria, it is eliminated. While still meeting the above conditions, an infantry unit must move to a hex that will either give it a beneficial terrain modifier against direct fire from all enemy units, or that will place it outside the line of sight of enemy units if possible. If the unit cannot reach such a hex, it must use all of its movement allowance moving toward such a hex. A hex behind a hedgerow would only qualify as a route destination if all enemy line of sight was traced through it. Likewise, a hill would only qualify if it was a higher elevation than all enemy troops within normal range. If a unit can legally reach multiple different hexes that qualify, it may choose the one to which it routes. If a route path to a hex that either has beneficial terrain or is outside the line of sight of enemy units does not exist, then the unit must attempt to trace a route path toward the edge of the board defined as a route edge in the scenario. While following all other route rules, it must attempt to reach this edge using the fewest number of movement points. If a unit reaches the route edge with at least one movement point remaining, it routes off the edge of the board and is eliminated. If a gun fails a morale check during the route phase, it is eliminated unless it is being transported. Route casualties. If the unit fails the morale check by a margin equal to or greater than its casualty rating, it is also reduced, eliminating an already reduced unit, and fully suppressed after routing. So fails the morale check. So this is the casualty rating. This is the morale check. So to fail a morale check by its casualty rating would mean you have to roll this. Or so if your morale's at 2 and you rolled a 10, you're equal to the casualty rating. So that's 8. So that means when you're fully suppressed, you have a 1 in 10 chance when hit of causing, what is that, a total casualty? I have to read more. I want to be able to easily convert this to like, what are the odds that I'm going to suffer a casualty? For this purpose, use the second number of the front side casualty rating unless it is in melee or adjacent to an enemy unit not in melee, in which case it uses the first number of the casualty rating, or only number if the unit is reduced. I see. Okay, so this number makes you more likely to rout and get reduced. Okay. Example. A squad with a casualty rating of 4-7 is fully suppressed, morale of 1. The squad is in open ground and takes a rout morale check. It would be unaffected on a roll of 1. It would rout on a roll of 2 to 7. On a roll of 8 or higher, it would be reduced at the end of its rout. If it was also adjacent to an enemy unit, it would be reduced on a roll of 5 or higher. Okay. And do you just, so I think you automatically hit, is that right? If you pass the morale check, then you hit, you get a hit automatically? Or do you have to roll to see if you get a hit? Infantry fire. Yeah, I read this already. Attempts to inflict suppression. Fire effects. So I think it's just the morale check, right? At least a suppression result. Okay. Adjust the firepower by the modifiers. Okay. Oh, okay, right. Okay, right. So you roll a morale check to see if you can do it, and then you roll against the firepower to see if you score a hit. Right, okay. Got it. You roll against the morale. Okay, so you roll against the morale to see if you do anything. You roll against the firepower to see if you get a hit, and then the other unit rolls against their morale in combination with their casualty rating to see if they rout. Right. Yeah. To see if what happens. To see if they what's it? If you don't pass the what is it? If you don't pass the morale check, you get a suppression result. Fire effects. So right. Okay. So 290 fire. Suppression. So okay. As a unit takes it morale to pre. Okay. So do they have to take a morale check at the moment they get inflicted with suppression? When it attempts to do something. To resolve a morale check, roll a die. Okay. Op fire. Okay. Where? Let me search. Um, so I think if you're just sitting in a hex, you don't do a morale check at the time that you're shot at. I think that's how it works. Don't remember where that thing was that I read that said it like don't trigger or something like that. Okay. I think I get it. Squad with the squad is in open ground. It would route. Takes a route morale check. What is a route morale check? Suppression and morale checks. What does it mean to take a route morale check? Subject to route. Oh, okay. So they are subject to route. I see. A route morale check is a morale check conducted during the route phase for units that are subject to route. Okay, got it. Roll 8 or higher would be reduced. Okay, got it. If it's also adjacent, it would be reduced on roll 5 or higher. Okay, got it. Note, units that fail a route phase morale check, this is a better name for it. Not a route morale check. It should be a route phase morale check. Units that fail a route phase morale check while in melee will be eliminated unless another friendly unit remains in melee, because they would be moving adjacent to an enemy unit not in melee as soon as they left the hex. If a side has 2 units in a melee, both must take their morale check before either routes. If both units must route, they are both eliminated. No quarter combat. Increased morale. The following units have their morale increased during the route phase. Starting in 1942, all Russians and Germans in melee against each other have their morale increased by 1. All non-Japanese units that are in melee against Japanese have their morale increased by 2. Reduced route casualties. The following full-strength units that would be eliminated for failure to route because they failed their morale check by 1 are instead reduced and remain in place. For failure to route because they failed their morale check by 1. SS squads and weapons teams in scenarios versus Russians only. Reduced route cache. Following full strength. We eliminated for failure to route because they failed their morale check by 1. I'm not sure what that means. Example. A suppressed SS squad, morale of 6, is alone in melee with a Russian unit in 1942. It has an effective morale of 7 due to the increased morale rule. Its morale check during the route phase results in a roll of 8. It fails by 1. Since routing out of the hex would eliminate it, it instead remains in place, is reduced, and fully suppressed. Okay. Melee phase. Whenever an infantry unit occupies the same location as an enemy infantry unit or gun, they are considered in melee, even though melee combat is not resolved until after the rout phase. The player moving first in the scenario decides the order in which melees are resolved and must decide on command point usage and allocate casualties first. Okay. A unit with a subscripted melee firepower uses that firepower in melee, and we saw that here. Guns have a melee firepower of 2. Otherwise, the unit uses its normal, not proficient, firepower for its melee firepower. Okay. Each squad, weapons team, and gun in melee rolls 2 dice with no modifiers. Count each die separately. For each result that is less than or equal to its melee firepower, one enemy unit in that hex is reduced. Owner's choice. Weapons teams and guns are eliminated, not reduced, if they suffer casualties in melee. If a command point is spent on a unit in melee, both dice of the unit receiving the command point must be rolled again. Only one round of melee is resolved in each location per turn. Okay. Morale does not affect melee combat. Its effect is felt in the rout phase. For example, an American airborne squad, firepower of 6, is in the same hex as a German first line squad, firepower of 5. Both of them roll 2 dice. The American rolls a 3 and a 6, causing 2 reductions, eliminating the German. The German rolls a 1 and a 6, reducing the airborne unit. Simultaneous. Both sides make their melee attacks before any casualties are taken, except in the case of concealed units in the jungle. Flank bonus. Units may not change their facing while in melee. When an infantry unit moves into melee through one of the flank hexes of an unconcealed enemy infantry unit or gun, a flank counter is placed on the moving unit. A flank counter is not placed if the moving unit enters a jungle hex occupied by a concealed enemy unit. If there are 2 enemy units in the hex, the flank counter is only earned if entering through a flank hex of both units. A flank counter is not negated if another enemy unit subsequently enters a hex to support the first enemy unit in the melee. A unit with a flank counter gets +1 to its melee firepower during the melee phase. Flank counters are removed during the recovery phase, even if units are still in melee. So it's like a measure of surprise. Recovery phase. During the recovery phase, all units marked with suppression counters, except those still in melee, recover 1 step of suppression. Red to yellow, yellow to full morale, and then remove the counter. All dispersed smoke counters are removed, and all smoke counters are flipped to the dispersed side. All used opfire, command point, flank, sustained fire, and illumination counters are removed. Move and unconfirmed kill counters are not removed. Okay, move and unconfirmed kill counters are not removed. Okay. Roll for monsoon storm check when applicable. The turn counter is then advanced to the next turn. If this was the last turn on the turn track, then the scenario is over and victory is determined. If this is a campaign game, add fatigue to attacker and check to see if scenario ends. See Rule 62 for more information. Line of sight. Units can only fire at targets that they can see, exception mortar-directed fire. Line of sight is determined by laying a thread between the center dot of the firing unit's hex and the center dot of the target unit's hex, and applying the following conditions. Objects in the firing and target hexes do not impact line of sight. Roads, rivers, bridges, canals, shell holes, shadows, chimney smoke, and translucent terrain do not impact line of sight in any way. Line of sight is blocked if blocking terrain that is higher than both the firer and the target is in any of the intervening hexes and can be seen on both sides of the thread. Such terrain includes buildings, hedgerows, woods, hills, jungle, and swamp. Line of sight may also be impacted by hindering terrain. The terrain of a hex for movement and other purposes is defined by the terrain that is at the center hex dot. There are many different types of terrain. Rules for them can be found in the terrain section. Players may not check line of sight for free during play. If a unit attempts to fire and the line of sight is found to be blocked, the unit is marked as used. However, line of sight may always be checked to a conceal marker in open ground to see if it loses its concealment during the route phase to determine a legal route path and to see if a unit may gain concealment. Okay. Conceal counters and decoys. At the start of a scenario, any unit may be covered with a conceal counter if it is in terrain that would entitle it to a beneficial terrain modifier from direct fire attacks, or if it sets up outside of the line of sight of all enemy units. An infantry unit may be covered with a conceal counter if it sets up adjacent to a hedgerow, wall, dike road, or on a hill, but the conceal counter is immediately removed if any of the conditions for loss of concealment are met during setup. Reinforcements may enter play concealed. Okay. Firepower is reduced by 1 when firing at a concealed unit, as indicated by the -1 on the conceal counter. Decoys may be given to a side at the start of a scenario. These are covered with a conceal counter just like any other unit. Decoys can be moved or may be marked as used like any other unit. They have 5 movement points. Using a decoy counts against operations range. They are treated like regular units, including forcing enemy units to take a route check if in open ground, but they may not fire. I see. A unit's conceal counter is removed if it becomes suppressed. An enemy infantry unit, including decoy or unmounted gun, not vehicles, not in melee, is adjacent. If it becomes suppressed, how do you measure? Oh, okay, so okay. An enemy infantry unit, including decoy or unmounted gun, not vehicles. I'm wondering how this affects decoys. Okay. An enemy infantry unit, including decoy or unmounted gun, not vehicles, not in melee, is adjacent. Exception. Jungle 51.1. An enemy unit that moves adjacent must first survive all fire in that hex before it affects concealment. It is in open ground and line of sight of an enemy unit. It is in open ground and within line of sight of an enemy unit, including vehicles. If the line of sight is questionable, it may be checked. It passes its morale check and close assaults or fires. Concealment is removed if it is attacked by an aircraft or canister fire. Concealment is removed if it can be removed. It can be removed voluntarily at any time. And concealment is removed if it is a Japanese unit selected for a banzai charge. Decoys are removed the moment they lose concealment. If a situation occurs where 2 opposing units would lose their concealment, the moving unit always loses concealment first. An unconcealed infantry unit may gain a conceal counter by being marked opfire or used, but not after firing or route outside of the line of sight of all enemy units. Okay. Fog of War. Area of Control, AOC. Area of Control is used for placing units. It is defined as any hex that is closer to a friendly route edge than at least 2 friendly units, or the sole remaining friendly unit. It also cannot have 2 or more enemy units closer to that same friendly route edge. Units in melee still count when determining area of control. Okay. Fog of War. If your side receives Fog of War reinforcements, place them in a cup. You may draw 1 random unit from the cup each turn during either side's operations range, and immediately place it on the board. Note that you can't place it out of sequence with a command point, and you don't need to place it in command range. Oh, okay, so what this means is you can't use a command point to place it before the other person's turn, if the other person's supposed to go first. And you don't need to place it in command range if using command and control rules. If drawn during the opponent's operations range, the Fog of War unit must be placed in beneficial terrain within 1 to 2 hexes of an enemy that just entered a new hex. If drawn during the opponent's operations range. Okay. Each turn during either side's ops range. I'm not sure what that... How does that mean? I mean, what does that mean? How does that work? Out of sequence. During either side's op range. And immediately place it on the board. If drawn during the opponent's operations range, the Fog of War unit must be placed in beneficial terrain within 1 to 2 hexes of an enemy that just entered a new hex. Pause the enemy move as if pausing for op fire. Oh wow, so you can just like pop new units on the map. Within its own area of control and closer to its route edge than the moving enemy. Not in the hex the enemy just left, nor within 1 hex of a non-moving enemy. Okay. Unused. It must be placed unused and concealed until removed per Rule 15, as if it had been in all respects present before the moving enemy entered its new hex. For example, it may immediately opportunity fire at the enemy unit whose movement triggered its placement. Interesting. Okay. I haven't used this rule before. If drawn during your operations range, the Fog of War unit must be placed in beneficial terrain within its area of control, within 3 hexes of a friendly unit, and at least 3 hexes away from all enemy units. It may instead immediately enter from a friendly route edge. In either case, it must be used for an operation or marked for op fire, counting against your operations range. Combat events. This rule allows for unexpected events to occur during combat. It is an optional rule in scenarios set in Europe, but it is required in scenarios set in the Pacific because of the prevalence of Japanese snipers. Whenever a squad or weapons team rolls a 1 when firing on another unit during the operations phase, there is the possibility of a combat event. Morale checks and special anti-tank weapon checks cannot trigger a combat event, but a roll against the special anti-tank weapon firepower could. Okay. The effects of the original roll are resolved normally. Afterwards, an additional roll is made and on a roll of 1, 2, or 3, a combat event occurs. 4 to 10 is no effect. This is just like in Combat Commander. They have the sniper event on some cards. If the result is a 1, then the player whose unit made the attack must roll on the combat event table. If the result is a 2, then the other player rolls on the combat event table. If the entry in the table gives a choice, the player rolling on the table makes that choice. However, a choice must be made if possible. This means that the player choosing the results of an event may have to do something that is detrimental to him. Apply the effects immediately. If the result is a 3, then roll on the Japanese event table. If the scenario does not include Japanese units, then ignore a roll of 3. Ignore a roll of 3. Okay. The Japanese player may still end up rolling on the combat event table on a 1 or a 2, but the Japanese also get to roll on the Japanese event table on a roll of a 3. If players would like to minimize combat events in the Pacific, they may choose to ignore the first combat events table and only have the Japanese roll on the combat event table on a roll of a 1. If a scenario requires the elimination of a certain number of units and one is brought back by a combat event, credit for eliminating a unit is retained. See the last page of the rulebook for the event tables. Okay. Scenario cards. Each scenario gives all the information needed to play that battle. The following applies to all scenarios, barring scenario special rules. A unit may not set up or enter in a hex that is half on one board and half on another, unless both boards are part of its setup or entrance location. All or part of any reinforcements may be kept off board to come in on a later turn, except for reinforcements that set up or enter in an area of control. Those must be brought on the turn they arrive. Okay. A hex is controlled by the side that last had a unit in or passing through the hex with no enemy units present. A unit is eliminated by opportunity fire, etc., when entering a hex does not control the hex. A unit eliminated when entering a hex does not control the hex. At the start of a scenario, all hexes within a player's setup area are considered controlled by that player. If a scenario requires the elimination of one side, surviving decoys by themselves would not give that side the victory. Vehicles may not be set up with a move counter. Moving off board costs 1 movement point. Moving off board, okay. If a scenario allows for force exchanges, they must be secretly decided upon by the player before scenario setup. These are always voluntary. Unless otherwise specified, units received in a force exchange are available on the same turn or restricted to the same setup location as the units given up. Yeah, I don't know what this stuff is talking about yet. If reinforcements set up on the board during the scenario, the player sets them up before that turn begins. They may not be placed adjacent to an enemy unit. They can be concealed. Okay. Not quite sure what that would look like. Okay, stop. The main rules above, plus any needed terrain rules, are all that you need to play the first training scenario. It is recommended that you play it before continuing. Afterwards, read only the rules for a particular unit, weapon, or terrain needed for a scenario. Remember, rules in green text are optional or for specific scenarios. Okay, let's look at the extended example of play. Board 20, 2 Germans, 1 German decoy, and 5 Russians. Each side in this example has 1 command point, an operations range of 1 to 2, and the Russians move first, figure 1, here. First operations phase, Russian. The Germans could spend their command point to do something first, but decline. The Russians have to use 1 or 2 units, and the squad in F7 here, fires at the decoy, unbeknownst to him, in G5 here. With a morale of 10, no morale check is needed. The firepower is 6, halved because of long range, down to 3. Oh, the no morale check of the Russian unit is needed. The firepower is 6, halved because of long range, down to 3. Submachine gun squads only have a range of 2, the middle number. -1 because the target is concealed, and -1 because the target is in a wood building, resulting in a firepower of 1 for the attack. So that's 1, you have a 1 in 10 chance of succeeding. The Russian luckily rolls a 1 and gets a suppression result. The conceal counter is removed. Oh, I see. Revealing a decoy, which is also removed, and the Russian squad is marked as used. I see. So that's a bit of a weird idea, that you can reveal decoys by getting suppression hits on. No, by getting a suppression result. Right. Okay. The Russian player decides to use another unit and moves one of the squads in H6 into H5. H6 here into H5 in this hex. Before he can move any farther, the German announces that he is going to op fire and removes the conceal counter from the unit in F5 here. This is op fire, so the proficient firepower of 5 is used, this second number. The German could spend his command point to increase this by 1, but chooses not to. The firepower for the attack is 5, proficient firepower, plus 4, because the Russian unit is moving in open ground 2 hexes away, for a total of 9. The German rolls a 3, which is 6 lower than his firepower. The Russian squad is reduced and takes 2 steps of suppression. Okay. Had he rolled a 2, the Russian squad would have been eliminated. Had the German rolled a 2, why? Because he rolls a 2, and you can add, what is it again? You add the casualty. Is it the first one? Second one? How does it work again? Had he rolled a 2, the Russian squad would have been eliminated. The German rolls a 3, which is 6 lower than his firepower. Oh, I see. So if the German had rolled a 2, his modified firepower is 9. If he rolls a 2, that is 7 less than his modified firepower, and you can add this second casualty rating to that 2 and be equal to the firepower, and in that case the Russian unit would have been eliminated. Got it. That's a bit of a brain bender. The German squad is marked as used. The Russian squad would like to continue moving, but now must pass a morale check because it took effective fire mid-move. He fails. He needed a 1 because he's fully suppressed, and the squad is marked as used. He could have spent his command point to re-roll the morale check, but declines. Having used 2 units, he can perform no other actions, and the operations phase passes to the Germans. Okay. Having used 2 units, he can put... Okay. Operations phase, Germans. The Germans must use 1 or 2 units. The 2 Russian units in G7 make a tempting target, here. But he decides to sit tight and marks the unit in E6 as op fire, here, this one. Operations phase, Russians again. The Russians once again have to use 1 or 2 units. They fire one of the squads in G7 at the revealed German squad in F5. Okay, F5 here. They fire one of the squads in G7 here at the revealed German squad in F5 here. The firepower is 6, the first number here, minus 2 because the German is in a stone building, for a total of 4. The modified firepower is 4. The Russian again rolls a 1, but this only results in a suppression of the German squad. Okay. Next, the Russian moves his squad in H6 here, into H5 here, with the reduced squad. Yes. The German player elects to spend a command point and final op-fire the squad in F5 here. Normally, final op-fire is only allowed in adjacent hexes, but spending a command point allows a unit to do it within normal range. Since it is suppressed, it must pass a morale check and fails. It needed a 6 or lower. The unit is marked with a command point counter, so it needed that yellow number, or lower, got it. The unit is marked with a command point counter, which was spent to no effect since it failed its morale check. The Russian unit continues to G5 into this building here. And the German unit may again final op-fire since the Russian is adjacent. This time the German passes its morale check. Proficient firepower of 5 is increased to 6 because the unit is adjacent. The firepower for the attack is then 6, minus 1 because the Soviets are in a wooden building, plus 3 because the Soviets are adjacent, minus 2 because it's final op-fire, for a total of 6. The roll is a 2, which reduces the unit and gives 2 steps of suppression. The Russian player must take a morale check. It needs a 1 because it's fully suppressed. That's the red number. This one. And this time passes. He originally had planned to move the unit into melee with the German, which would have used the last of its 5 movement points, but decides against doing so with a fully suppressed unit. He instead assault fires at the adjacent German. It has a proficient firepower of 3, minus 2 because the Germans are in a stone building, plus 3 because they are adjacent, for a total modified firepower of 4. Unfortunately, he rolls a 5 and misses. Had he spent a command point to increase his proficient firepower, it would have been another step of suppression on the German. Operations phase Germans again. The unit marked op-fire may not be selected for an action. Unit marked op-fire may not be selected as an action. Okay. And so the turn passes back to the Russians. Figure 3 here. Operations phase Russians again. The last Russian squad moves from G7 into G6. G7 here, G6 here. The suppressed German squad again attempts final op-fire. Okay. But rolls a 7 and fails its morale check. Okay. Because he's suppressed, he needs to roll a 6 or less. The German then removes the conceal marker in E6 here and fires that squad. The proficient firepower of 5 is increased to 6 because the unit is marked op-fire. Even if the Germans had another command point, this could not be increased any further because the proficient firepower can never be increased above the normal firepower before the application of terrain modifiers. So the firepower of 6 is plus 4 because the Soviet is moving in open ground into G6 for a total of 10. The German rolls a 9, resulting in suppression. The Russian must pass a morale check to keep moving, and does. This time he moves into melee with the squad in F5. All units have been used, And this concludes the operations phase. Figure 4. Got it. Route phase. Because the Russian player moved first, he must conduct his route phase first. Okay. The only Russian unit that must pass a route phase morale check is the one in melee. The squad in G5, here in this building, does not have to because the German it is adjacent to is in melee. The unit in H5, here, does not have to, even though it is in open ground, because the German in E6, here, does not have line of sight to it. The Russian squad in melee, here, rolls a 7 and fails. He's got a suppression marker, so he's got to roll a 6 or less. However, the Russian player saved his command point and decides to spend it now to re-roll this check. This time he rolls a 5 and passes. The German player now must conduct his part of the route phase, and his unit in melee rolls a 9 and fails the morale check. With no command points left, the result must be accepted. The unit is forced to rout out of the hex. Since there are no German units remaining in the melee hex, this routing unit will immediately be adjacent to a Russian unit not in melee, and so is eliminated. Why can't he route into this hex? It's interesting that he's not allowed to route into this hex. That's very interesting. Melee phase. There is no melee phase because one of the sides in melee died in the route phase. It is important to think of the route phase as almost part of melee. Because of the suppression that the Germans were under, it just turned out to be a very one-sided combat, and they were eliminated before they could fire. If they had both survived until melee, both squads would have rolled 2 dice and delivered 1 casualty reduction for each result less than or equal to their firepower. So I guess the reason they have to route into here is because of the route rules, like they have to move towards their board edge, something like that. Recovery phase. The used markers are removed. All suppression markers are reduced by 1 step, and the turn marker is advanced on the scenario card. Got it. Oh, and that's it. That's the end of the example of play. Got it. All right. Well, that's enough of the rules to get into the first scenario, and I guess I might make more videos as I go through the later scenarios.